welcome. This is The Art of Life. I'm your host, Willow Chang Leon, and if you don't know by now, well, goodness, we broadcast live every Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. here in the heart of downtown. Check us out on Facebook and stay edumacated. We have so much to talk about today, and I'm just going to put it on the table. This is one of several times I'm hoping to have our guest, because she is a font of knowledge, an advocate, an educated woman, and someone who really knows what she's talking about. Of course, we're talking about Kathryn Xian, who wears many hats, running also for Congress. In addition to that, creator of Girl Fest, working with community gardening, human rights, human trafficking, the list goes on. So many things of importance, not only to Hawaii, but on a global perspective. So, as we like to do with Art of Life, let's dive right into first to give people a backstory about how you came to be. How did you find the calling to be involved on the community level as you are?
Well, I think it's been kind of like a lifelong process to become an advocate and a community activist. It takes a lot of different life experiences. I would have to say, in my work with human trafficking, it was being born and raised here in these islands and really seeing and learning about the significance of not only the land but its people that gave me sort of like a sense of positive territoriality, I guess you would say. When human trafficking happens, you think that it happens, most people think that it happens somewhere else, not in Hawaii.
Right.
And when you realize it's happening in your home, it's a very jarring, rude awakening. And I wanted to do something about it once I realized that we in Hawaii had a really serious problem with it for both sex and labor. So I decided to take a stab at doing something about it.
Can I ask something? So for our viewers who may or may not be aware of this with human trafficking, and you clearly just hit the nail on the head, there's sex worker, sex trafficking, as well as labor issues. What do you think are the components that contribute to this problem? Is it lack of awareness? Is it education? Is it the cultural tendency here in Hawaii to not talk about things that might be uncomfortable? What do you think contributes to that? Is it our isolated state, our geography? Like, what makes this, one, happen, and two, maybe the resistance to discuss it?
Well, human trafficking has many roots, as you just illustrated, but I'd say the biggest root is poverty. Poverty aggravates a situation where humans tend to act irrationally and become disconnected from a sense of community and wholeness. Through poverty, people are, I guess, left to basically sell themselves or other people in order to survive economically. And it calls upon us to kind of really reassess this economic system within which we live on a global scale.
Right.
Because there is a line that you have to draw. Like, making money is fine and it's neutral, but the haves and have-nots have become so widened and separated from each other. And there's this great economic disparity from which many evils arise. Human trafficking is just one of them.
Right. It's kind of common in our house. We talk about the fact we feel like we're all becoming serfs. And we're not talking waves that you're writing. I mean, almost a feudal type of system. You talked about poverty as being one of those roots. I think to add to that, in addition to poverty, which is an economic thing, I think there's a mental and there's an emotional poverty. So it's not just the person on the street who's human trafficked, or the homeless person, or the person who's houseless, but that idea that you feel you don't have enough, so therefore you can't extend and help out another person because you feel you don't have enough. I mean, I think that there's like a psychological poverty that almost it enables the situation and it exacerbates it and it makes it even worse.
Yeah, we actually in the West suffer from this Malthusian scarcity theory type of mentality that you just correctly identified and illustrated, where we feel like we need to hoard or conserve rather than share. Nature, the way nature is set up, it gives in abundance. And we, in our ways of life and society, have been working against nature. We've been trying to shut off that abundance So one of the first things that societies do is control water and control energy and control food production. And those things are not supposed to be shut off. They're supposed to provide for all. And in that curtailing of benefits and the public trust comes this stratification of classes, of races, of even genders, and gives rise to slavery. And we see that today. Human trafficking is modern-day slavery, and slavery was not abolished with with Abraham Lincoln.
Right.
It kept going on, just under the radar.
Do you see that there's a sense of irony where people are willing to go and see films or support films like 12 Years a Slave, or even, what was the other one? I'm trying to think. It was in LA. My mind goes blank. It will come to me. But there's a lot of them. I mean, it seems like it's de rigueur. It's cool to acknowledge that slavery happened in the past and to absolve that debt and that guilt. And yet it's right under our nose, and it's in our homes, and people seem to be very unaware of that. Could you give us some, you said what there, but sex trafficking. I think people make the assumption that if someone is a sex worker, somehow it's of their choice or by their design. I don't think they understand all of the variables that go into that. Can you elaborate on that? And then later with the labor aspect, perhaps Alun Farms. Yeah, we know what you're doing.
Sure. Well, yeah, there's stigmas with regard to human trafficking, which is why human trafficking was allowed to get so horrible in Hawaii. And it's due to a misidentification. So labor traffic victims are often misidentified as illegal immigrants. And sex trafficked victims are most often misidentified as either juvenile delinquents if they're children or independent prostitutes. The majority of prostituted persons are not independent. They have somebody controlling them.
Right.
So these social stigmas very recently have become a little bit more malleable and dissolvable with more education and more agencies such as Pacific Alliance to Stop Slavery coming to light with movies such as, a lot of human trafficking movies have been coming out. Not My Life, Very Young Girls. 12 Years a Slave, I have to admit, I haven't watched yet because when you are an anti-trafficking advocate, you live it every day. It's kind of hard to bring yourself to watch a trafficking movie. Yeah. It's just because it's so severe. And these things actually do happen. And they've continued to happen. And I have very high hopes that with more public awareness and more education and more movies hitting the mainstream, people will start to realize that life isn't so pretty for the majority of people on the planet who live in poverty.
I think something that's interesting to address is that no one is asking for a pity party because you're not encouraging people to have to feel sad. The situation is sad by its complete construct. I'm going to kind of go there, and I want to congratulate you and thank you for all of the advocacy and all the work that you did concerning HPD.
Oh, yeah,
and
thanks.
that lovely thing. Can we, I know
Sure.
some people would say, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're going to talk about that. Well, you can Google this. This is public knowledge as it should be. In a nutshell, there were provisions within HPD that allowed them to solicit as Johns and even continue through with penetration and sex acts to so-called NAB prostitutes. And I think everyone was collectively shocked and mortified that this was allowed, that people were on the payroll and allowed to take advantage and basically victimize people who are already victims once and do it twice. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. When we discovered this several years ago, this little loophole in our legal code, we decided to do something back then. This was like 3 or 4 years ago, but the HPD lobby was very, very aggressive. They, for some reason, wanted the ability to have sexual penetration, to be able to use that during the course of an investigation. It's very important to understand that the offense of prostitution does not require an act of sex.
It's just this agreement of a solicitation. Okay.
It's a verbal agreement purely. So if you take that same standard and apply it to female undercover officers who pose as prostitutes, they don't have to take a lick of clothing off. They never have to touch the John. it's just a verbal agreement. Now, why is it such an important tool for male police officers? Not only was that sexist, all of this came out during testimony publicly, but it's highly abusive to victims who are also sex trafficked. So like you said, they're re-victimized, and it also upsets the balance of power and the way proper investigations are supposed to be conducted, because it's hard enough to get victims to come forward, to trust the system, to trust advocates working with police officers when they've been violated sexually by a police officer that came to them as a John or an undercover John. And so this gave rise to a lot of questions of how police have been doing these particular raids and investigations, and it brought up a lot of needed discussion.
What do you think was the resistance, or what was their argument that they felt this was justified?
Well, what was conveyed by the major of HPD, I think he was in Vice publicly on television and national television at that, was they needed the ability to protect themselves against what they called cop checking. And cop checking is when, as they described it, a prostituted person will check to see if the officer is an undercover officer and do something sexually to him. Like, I don't want to get too explicit on TV, but something of a very explicit sexual nature. And in reality, that never happens. None of our girls ever say that, or have ever cop checked. It's not a reality. Yeah. They do not want to actually have sex with any man. They are made to do that. That is their job that they are coerced to do to make money for their pimp or their mama-san. So they're very timid. They keep to themselves. They sit on the edge of their bed and wait for the John to approach them. It's never cop checking. So it was interesting that that police officer, that major, brought that up, because it was a big red flag for us that conveyed that the higher ups in HPD really don't know what really goes on behind closed doors in these investigations.
You know, all of this makes me realize that in addition to poverty as being a root, clearly we're dealing with a power issue. And I think a lot of people tend to forget, especially in the realm of sexual violence, they think because there's that sexual component that there's desire or passion. You hear passions of crime and all this baloney. I mean, this is clearly an issue about dominance, of who's going to get the upper hand, regardless of what the gender is or the sex. It's about establishing who's on top, and then we're not trying to be illicit here, explicit, I should say, who's on top and who's on the bottom. And that, to me, clearly sounds like a power issue.
It is, and I think HPD this year has gotten a lot of flack for abuse of power issues from the press and new legislation. Aside from our law that just was signed by the governor last week, there was an anti-police corruption law making them, or requiring them to disclose when an officer has been disciplined for a serious offense.
And I'm just going to take this moment to say this, just in case anyone is curious. I'm going to be bold enough and speak on behalf of us. We are not against the police. I just want to be clear about that, because as upholding citizens and people who believe in the system, we understand that the police are here to work for the citizens. We simply want accountability. We want people to be responsible for their actions, and we want them to uphold the law. And that should be consistent for everybody, regardless of what side of the equation you are. Etc. So I just want to be clear about that. I don't want to get a bunch of hate mail and people saying that we don't like police people. That's not it. What we don't like is inappropriate behavior.
Right. We work with a lot of police officers and other forms of law enforcement that do incredibly wonderful work in the area of human trafficking. And it just takes those bad apples to make everybody think that the entire force is corrupt.
Right.
And also, those few bad apples ruin the entire process for all awesome, wonderful police officers out there doing great work, because it makes it really difficult for victims or witnesses to come forward thinking that they see one bad cop and they equate that with the entire force, right?
Oh, my goodness,
and that's the dynamic that ruins it for a lot of these investigations.
Talk to us about the labor side of things. So I think for some people who are familiar, they will think of maybe farms or agriculture, But or some people maybe it's sweatshops, but I'm sure there's a huge spectrum of different professions where human trafficking intercedes with labor forces. Can you give us some insight on that?
I would have to say, in my experience, the largest demographic of labor traffic victims in Hawaii specifically is in agriculture. So they're farm workers coming from Southeast Asia, and now we're seeing them come from South America.
Wow.
So there are various countries, and China as well, and the Philippines, that contribute to this burgeoning, underground society now that are full of trafficked or formerly trafficked victims.
And those are very, hello geography, those are very far, far distances to come to a set of islands in the middle of the Pacific.
Right.
So I mean, I'm assuming they must go through many, many hands to finally end up here in Hawaii.
Well, actually, no. They just come here directly.
Really?
Yeah. Most of them, I would say, come here directly. They may have stopped off in California, working on a farm there, but not more than one stop.
Do they think it's an indentured servant type of situation, or they pay somebody to be like I guess a mule that's more
No,
for like
they actually pay a pretty substantial recruiting fee to actually work in a legitimate, what they think is going to be a legitimate job in Hawaii in agriculture. And they get real visas that then expire, but they're not informed of the laws requiring visa renewal, and they don't know what their rights are. But because they're coming from countries that don't really have the same labor laws that we do that protect their workers.
Okay.
So they get exploited, they're forced to work every day from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., only one lunch break. And this is farm work, this is hard labor every single day. There's maybe some of them get Sundays off, but usually they all have to work every single day. And they're made to live in shacks, deplorable conditions with no electricity or running water. And they have to pay, they get fined for everything that the landowner or the farm owner provides for them, like cell phones or food even, and materials to build their shacks. They get deducted pay from that.
So it's kind of like they're living in arrears, basically.
Yeah, on top of that, there's a very serious public health concern related to the noxious, restricted use pesticides that are being sold on the black market in a wide scale in Hawaii, statewide, that these workers are forced to spray in copious amounts along with other chemicals, which are actually not legal to mix any of these restricted use chemicals. And they suffer from anything from tumors, cancerous tumors, to seizures, hand tremors, blindness, paralysis, and death.
This is like a modern-day Luna system all over again.
Right, but if you think about it, those serious effects, which we have seen and documented in these workers with these pesticides, they are on the crop that ends up on our dinner tables. These are the pesticides being used in copious amounts by unlicensed applicators all over this island. And I worry about how that affects our land and our water table.
All really good points. I want to address something that I believe I've read, but you can correct me always if I'm misinformed. As a candidate running for office, you are flat out refusing funds from Monsanto and related companies. Tell us the importance of that. You're preaching to the choir to me, but I think perhaps there are people who are unaware of how many fingers these various corporations have their hands in. I mean, you're basically buying the political system if you're funding candidates extensively financially.
Exactly. I think that's what has led to the demise of democracy in our country is the fact that corporations are taking control of the democratic process, obliterating it, and filling key positions in government with people that are loyal to just the bottom line of those companies. And that's not what government's about. That's not what democracy is supposed to be about. If anything, the state is supposed to mitigate and ensure that the rights of the people are protected from unbridled capitalism.
Excellent. I wanted to ask you about Emalani. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes.
So Emalani Organic Community Farming, and all of these links are up on Facebook, and I will put the little Easter eggs and follow up when we post today's interview. But can you tell us about this project, the purpose that it serves, the community that serves, and its bigger goals?
Sure. Well, Emalani Garden was a sort of like a brainchild of mine, because the work that I do in labor trafficking, helping the victims, hearing their stories, seeing what these noxious pesticides have done to them, but also the plight of being an exploited worker, made me want to create something to make myself feel better, actually, and to give back to the community, and balance things out. There's so much what I call hewa, which is the Hawaiian term for just not pono behavior going on. And in order to counter that, I wanted to establish something in the heart of downtown that kind of recalled the basic principles that Queen Emma upheld and held so truly dearly to her heart. And she was is one of my inspirations. She died relatively young at age 49, I believe. She established. It was because of her that St. Andrew's Church in downtown exists. It's the only church that was actually invited to Hawaii by the Hawaiian people, and that says a lot to me anyway. She saw her people dying and almost completely decimated. She was responsible for Queen's Hospital, the Church of St. Andrews, and both the Priory School and Iolani. So those were the basics, like education, health, and spiritual health of her people that were being decimated during that time. And we wanted to bring that back in very little steps because, progress is sometimes slow. But we wanted to do it in a very simple way that, gave her honor. So we decided to implement an organic garden so people can come and plant with us or harvest organic vegetables. The whole idea is to provide anyone with healthy, organic, non-pesticided vegetables. And so we're doing a lot of workshops with homeless youth and with the general community on how to cook these vegetables and how to garden, how to weed, how to fertilize, all organically. And we started by planting kalo, and we got it from Waianae, from our friends out in Ka'ala Farms. And just by chance, one of the two varieties they gave us was Lihi Lihi Molina, which just so happened to be the favorite variety of Queen Emma.
Wonderful.
So when we were planting it, when we were establishing the taro lo'i, the dryland lo'i, it was all kind of like this feeling of like it just was meant to be.
Yeah, connectivity.
Yeah.
We have some images of that with the omniscient voice of God in. Can you cue us up some pictures of that? Okay.
That's actually Papahana Kua'ola. That's where we made our pohaku ku'iai. And these stones are made to actually make the poi from the taro.
It's a question I get frequently when I travel. Even recently I was in New York, and people always say, what does poi taste like? Like they're very intrigued and fascinated with poi in terms of its structural setup, but I don't think they're aware of the significance it has in Hawaiian culture, really being the bedrock of just the community harvest and working together and having that connection with the land.
Right. If you go back to what we were talking about, poverty being the root to many evils, you got to consider when you look at those stones and you look at the way things used to be. Before contact, there was no such thing as homelessness, and poverty. Everybody provided for each other, and the land provided for them. I don't mean to say that we go back to a primitive lifestyle, but we use that basic knowledge and that basic belief to provide for each other rather than conserve on an idea of we're going to lose something because resources are scarce. We should start changing that dynamic and that worldview because there's no empirical proof saying that we will run out of resources and we will all suffer and starve to death. That's actually not proven. We might run out of oil, which is a different matter all unto itself.
Exactly. I think something that very clearly is a natural example of that is a forest fire. Now, no one is rooting for a forest fire. Those are clearly terrible things and you lose a lot of life and trees and what have you. However, after a forest fire and after a clearing, there's always regrowth, and it comes back and it's lush and abundant. And I think that if anyone would be made aware of this process, the natural cycle of the earth is that there is abundance. It's completely written in the DNA of the life cycle.
Right.
So this idea, like you said, of scarcity doesn't really serve much of a purpose other than fueling control and fear.
Right, which only ultimately ends in destruction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, we're getting deep here. I gave you guys a warning that we were going to hit on those topics, and you may say, gee, it's no picnic, but you know what? These are the things that really affect everybody, whether you're aware of it or not. Want to do your research and we want to bring on the right people. We have a few more images. I'd love to get to those because sometimes we talk story and then we forget about those. Ian's going to just, we have a beautiful young lady here, and I'd like for you to talk about this because we are going to go there. It's not going to be swept under the rug. Hawaii has a very large, continuing, growing, expansive homeless situation. Notice I didn't say problem, it's a situation. It affects everybody on different levels. And most recently, Bill 44, 42, 43, 44 are at different stages of either being passed or tossed out. And to let our viewers there know, it's the sit and lie bill, which basically is saying that if you sit or lie in a public space, you're going to be arrested and thrown in jail. So the criminalization of homelessness. Let's talk about all of those things. That's a lot of information there.
Yeah, that hearing, the first hearing of these 5 bills, 5 altogether, just happened yesterday to expand the mayor's proposal to criminalize the poor to be island-wide, not just in Waikiki. One was deferred, and that one was expanding these criminalization laws to the downtown area, downtown ward area. As for myself and my agencies, we're adamantly opposed to any sort of criminalization of poverty because we feel that that would lead to state-sanctioned oppression. Not only that, it's been proved in studies from UC Berkeley that these sit-and-lie laws do not create an environment that's more conducive to economic activity. So passing these dehumanizing, traumatic, criminalizing laws to the poor, against the poor would not help businesses. There's no empirical proof. And that's from a study, like I said, that came out of UC Berkeley right before they decided to shelve their proposal for passing a sit-and-lie law.
I'm curious, under this type of umbrella, would that also include people who are doing civil protest, people peaceful protest? If you're sitting in line to buy tickets for a concert, or I mean, is it specifically targeting only homeless? And how do they determine someone's status of being homeless or not?
See, that's where the issue of constitutionality comes in, and I'm glad you brought that up because the bill does very well in explaining who is exempt from this law, and that's anybody, like you said, that is choosing to express their freedom of speech or in line to buy something. But it's specifically geared towards targeting extremely impoverished people or homeless, the houseless people, because they're the only ones that would really, on a routine basis, sit and lie on the sidewalk. Now, the reason why that's come to be is because of several years of anti-homeless bills that have restricted them from living or being on beaches and in parks. So they've got really nowhere else to go left except for the sidewalk.
Unless you want to bring your sledgehammer out.
Like Tom Brower.
Yeah, we had to go there. Amazing. I'm going to refer to something that you had sent me because I thought, oh, this is good. Serious concerns of criminalization of nonviolent offenses. So things to consider, prison overcrowding and incarceration of nonviolent offenders. One of the things I thought that was fascinating is there was some information that stated that it costs more to send somebody to jail than it does to actually have them in a facility.
Yeah. First of all, it's unethical and probably unconstitutional to pass these criminalization laws in order to coerce people into shelters. Secondly, the shelters are unsafe. We've gotten many complaints about how people have been treated in these shelters. They separate families from each other. They're gender specific. They charge you for entry. You have to have ID in order to enter, or you have to be a Hawaii resident in order to seek shelter.
Wow.
And if you are a subject of a raid, which goes on 3 or more times a week on the homeless, you could have your ID confiscated and you wouldn't be able to enter a shelter.
Then okay, now we're talking about loopholes. To me, that seems like a screaming loophole. What do you do if you're in that situation? You've been raided 3 times, you have no ID. Where are you supposed to go?
Exactly. There's nowhere except for increasing your odds at being arrested the next time you're caught. And so then you're incarcerated. If you can't bail out, you face the judge. If you're a repeat offender, you get more time. And that for every petty misdemeanor and misdemeanor offender, up in jail for up to 30 days, that in an already overcrowded prison system, there's 4 or 5 people to a cell. We already have a problem of transferring other inmates to the mainland, which the governor 4 years ago vowed that he would return. And it's not helping the overburdened court and incarceration system, right, really. And it only would aggravate and taxpayers even more, because we're the ones that are going to be footing the bill for that.
Right, which was point number 2. I don't know why these phones can't stay on, but apparently you have to put the code. You guys know this. This is ThinkTech Hawaii, for heaven's sakes. Waste of taxpayer dollars. Stated that the city spends $15,000 each time it sweeps a street of homeless persons. I mean, that's from Civic Beat. Thank you, Civic Beat. We love you. That's just ridiculous. I mean, where do we have the funds for that? I love how we want to build a new stadium and a new Blaisdell and fund rail, and we can't even take care of the needs of our citizens. I mean, where are we going to get this money? This is ridiculous.
Well, the taxpayers is where the city's going to get the money.
It's
and it's a really simple fix. We just need to implement Housing First and other innovative housing programs for the houseless. And there's already been $32 million allocated for this purpose of implementing Housing First. Unfortunately, what hasn't been fully funded was the operational costs needed to implement Housing First. So that is another catch. It looks good on paper and in the press because Housing First now has all of this money, but unfortunately, how are we going to implement it if we don't have the full funding for that?
Very good question. Dehumanization. And I think that it's interesting that we've moved from, well, not completely, but everyone has been educated that it's bad to discriminate based on somebody's race. But here, this is clearly a form of discrimination based on someone's financial standing. How can that be justified?
That is something that our state is going to have to face really, really soon. We have never really gone through a civil rights era that was based on race or gender. Hawaii was kind of quiet in that respect and quelled any uprising from the Hawaiian movements for sovereignty and liberation. And what has always kind of pervaded was this plantation sort of mentality of rich and poor, serf and plantation owner, basically, king. And that needs to be addressed because at one point, and I said this in my hearing at City Hall, at one time, Waikiki, the business owners in Waikiki tried to make Waikiki whites only. And now we're seeking to do that, but it's not on a racial basis, it's against the poor. It's still not right. It's the same paradigm. And we, for some reason, think it's okay to oppress poor people. And we don't often have enough dialogue about it because there are not many of us advocates for the poor.
Do you think that the heart of the matter is that I think homelessness is something that everyone realizes along with being born and dying, maybe taxes, everyone really does have the possibility of being homeless. I mean, it's such a huge primal fear for our lifestyle. I mean, you hear that saying like, oh, they're 2 paychecks away from being homeless or whatever, but On a psychological thing, tends to be one of the big archetypes for people, is being homeless or being a bag lady. If anyone saw Blue Jasmine, the Woody Allen film, oh, heaven forbid, the worst possible thing that happened to Cate Blanchett is she was a bag lady, and that's supposed to, evoke fear and terror in the hearts of everybody who saw the film. Do you think that it's the fear of homelessness that contributes to the lack of compassion? Because, I would think it would be the opposite. The fact that everyone does have the possibility to be homeless, and it's a great equalizer, should be the very reason why we're invested in trying to find solutions for this situation.
I think people have a weird attitude towards money in general.
I don't know what you're talking about.
And so, unfortunately, what I've seen with poverty is that people who have money or who are relatively wealthy usually blame poor people for their own poverty. And I think that's completely wrong, not only wrong, but it parallels the type of blame the victim dynamic that you see in domestic violence situations or in rape victims, where courts and juries and defense lawyers will blame the victim for what they wore or how they acted or if they were drunk. Same thing with poverty and people in poverty and people who are homeless. So, they're looking just for a handout, or they should get a job, they're too lazy, or they chose not to go to school, or some crazy generalization like that, which is the furthest thing from reality. What is real is that Hawaii has the worst regressive tax system in the nation, where
we're number one.
We have the second highest unsheltered homeless rate per capita in the nation, per capita. And we also have the highest cost of living. Yes, we may have raised the minimum wage, but it's far from a living wage. People still can't afford rent. We've also made it almost impossible to be homeless in any public space. And you can't even be homeless in your car.
Wow. Or as they say in Japanese, sugoi. That, to me it just sounds like that we have a recipe for something that it's not a question of if but when. Hawaii's at this juncture where there are serious concerns, social ills. I kind of cringe using that word, but I'm going to use it because it's a social ill. There's clearly a dis-ease with what's going on. What type of things would you suggest? And simple things. I think even just creating dialogue is first and foremost a start. You have to at least have some level of comfort or compassion to discuss these things.
Yeah. Well, what I see that it's happening that is really positive is people are getting angry about these things. They are seeing them for what they are. It takes conflict in order for people to really understand how corrupt our system can be. Where our certain politicians stand on issues. So in a lot of ways, these contentions and these conflicts in the news and out there on the streets are necessary for people to wake up and take a stand on something. And people are. And I think that's a great step in the right direction. There's more movements in the areas of food justice, human trafficking, homeless persons' rights, ending poverty than I've seen ever before. And people are really starting to mobilize and speak out for their brothers and sisters, not just for themselves.
Speaking of mobilizing, we do have some images, and people are very visual, so if we could run a few of those, because these are wonderful programs and advocacy that you are involved with. So here we have PASS, which you had mentioned earlier today, and tell us about that.
Well,
just to remind us.
Yeah, PASS stands for the Pacific Alliance to Stop Slavery, and we're a local organization, nonprofit, that solely is devoted to assisting survivors of human trafficking. Now that's both female and male, adults and children, for both labor or sex trafficking.
And there is a Facebook presence, so you can join that and get involved. There's also another image we have, if you have GirlFest.
That's the GirlFest logo.
Yeah, so hey, I'm a child of every generation, but GirlFest was really instrumental in bringing people together, a sense of community, discussing issues that, again, people don't necessarily want to talk about, empowering women, and just bringing attention to community issues. Can you tell us a bit, just a skosh about GirlFest for the uninitiated?
Sure, yeah. Well, it's about 10 years old, and our mission is to prevent violence against women and girls through education and art. So we do a lot of concerts and conferences and,
Right.
and artistic events surrounding the issue of women's empowerment and surviving sexual assault, speaking out about it, revising policies to address it. We got the UH to declare all 10 of its campuses statewide rape-free zones. We got it to revise its policy.
Mm-hmm.
It still needs revision. And there's still a problem. There's definitely still a problem of sexual assault and how it's handled at the UH campus, which still needs to be addressed. But the federal government's taken over that investigation, so we can step back and wait till to see what they found.
Right. And then we have one more, I do believe, image. There isn't another image. I was giving you a little Susanna Hoffs Bangles eyes there. I stand corrected. Please tell us how people can find out about you. Clearly, you're online. You have some. This is going to be a busy time for you. I mean, this is the calm before the storm.
Yeah, major campaigns.
Are we going to do sign waving, debates,
there will
meet and greets? Tell us a little bit about that.
We have a joint sign waving event with Kumuhina,
Okay.
and that'll be on the 4th of July in the Kahala, Ainahaina area.
Okay.
All of this stuff is you can source on my Facebook or website. My Facebook is constantly being updated with things that I'm involved with, whether it be protecting the homeless, fighting human trafficking, and the like. And that's facebook.com/Kathryn Xian.
I want to bring up one last thing, and this is the curveball because it wouldn't be the art of life if there wasn't a curveball. Your last name, your surname, Xian. Is it the same character for immortal? I'm curious.
Actually, well, I'm Korean, so I don't know what the actual
Does it look like this?
calligraphy looks like. I
Like
really
that?
wouldn't know.
The only reason why I
actually.
bring it up is we share a name, believe it or not.
Oh, we
So
do?
my middle name is, in Cantonese, it's Lo Sin. In Mandarin, it's Liu Xian. Xian being the same name. And I was recently told, because I was given some misinformation about my name, but Xian is in reference to a Taoist immortal, people who are imbued with great wisdom and immortality, but responsibility as well. So when I had learned about this meaning of Xian, and then I saw your name, I thought it's so befitting to you that you're, whether you're wherever or not, the work that you're doing, your life's work, is living up to that concept, that responsibility of having wisdom, but sharing it with others. We want to have you on the show again. We will make that happen because any one of the projects that you're involved with clearly are deserving of at least 50 minutes on the clock, uninterrupted. But we only have this one time right now. We will have you a couple more times this year, fit you in. I know that you're a busy, busy woman, but I want to personally thank you for all the work that you do. You clearly inspire me and many others. I would encourage you all to get involved, regardless of whether you live in Hawaii or abroad. Community starts at home, right? So, Kathryn Xian, anything you'd like to share with us, a call to action, a cone of wisdom?
No, I'm very glad that you invited me on the show, and I would like to say that Willow and I go way back.
I don't know what you're talking about.
We actually went to elementary school together. I remember Willow actually being a JPO, the only JPO who never yelled at kids for running.
I was kind of an anti-JPO, but I was like, please don't do that. Watch out.
More like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah. It's true, in the heart of Manoa. You know, and sometime we'll have to talk story because it's a certain kind of person that speaks up for the underdog, you know, and clearly in all these situations, these are people, disenfranchised people who may have been muted or don't feel comfortable in their skin or feel that they can't speak. You're basically taking on and bringing them and giving them a voice. And there's a mindset, there's a heart set, psychology that goes to that. And I'd love to know more, and I'm sure our viewers would as well, because that's a unique type of a calling to speak out for those, you know. It's awesome.
Yeah, thanks.
And I commend you for all of that. And especially, let's be frank, in Hawaii, it's not necessarily always been a culture where people are encouraged to speak up. So it's a huge act of bravery. Whether it's normal for you, I still acknowledge it and really respect that. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
So yeah, we'll have you on again. We have another wonderful guest next week. You've got to check in next week and see who it is. This is The Art of Life. If you have questions, comments, or concerns, you can check us out. Again, The Art of Life with Willow Chang. It was too long, couldn't fit that other last name there. People are blown up, they want to talk to me. Have a wonderful, safe weekend, and we'll see you in July. Aloha.